Well, Gantz was part of the war cabinet, which is the specific cabinet that was set up for decision making about the war itself, rather than being part of the regular government coalition. Israel's political system obviously is quite different to our own and relies on coalitions of lots of smaller parties joining together, along with usually the party that got the most votes and then forming a government. But in this case, Israel was suffering because it has several people within the wider cabinet and government who are, let's say, further to the right. And that meant that when the war broke out, Netanyahu wanted to put together a small decision-making cabinet that would be more moderate in terms of those decisions. So Gantz stepping down from that war cabinet is significant because he was seen in some ways as the adult in the room who would moderate those sorts of decisions. But it doesn't change Benjamin Netanyahu's majority, that he now has 64 out of 120 seats in the parliament. And that means that the government still stands. And if anything, it might actually mean that Netanyahu has to lean further right in order to make decisions now, because he could replace him with somebody further to the right. And in fact, that's one of the possibilities that could now happen.
What is the kind of barometer saying in terms of satisfaction with Mr. Netanyahu from his own peer group? Of course, there's been a lot of controversies, and recently, of course, just a couple of days ago, those hostages thankfully were released, but it came at a price, and there's been a lot of criticism of Mr. Netanyahu for, sledgehammers and walnuts and all the rest of it, despite the fact that they didn't start this particular battle, but a sense of disproportionality. Not the first time that accusation has been made. Is this a game changer, this latest development with those 4 people being released?
In terms of the war itself, I think pretty much any Prime Minister of Israel would conduct a very similar war to the one that we're seeing. But what we are also seeing that maybe would vary according to who's at the top is the reflection of international opinion. And so Benjamin Netanyahu has been throughout his career very good at standing up to pressure from international partners, even allies like the United States. Remember that he stood up to Obama for many years, and now he appears to be doing the same to Biden, who's put a lot of pressure on Israel to accept deals and withdrawals that Netanyahu doesn't want. I would say that while many politicians might try to do that within Israel in Netanyahu's position, he's extremely resilient and the man can deal with quite a lot at the same time. But his popularity is challenged at the moment. And in polling, Gantz does score higher than him if you ask the population who they prefer as a leader. But Gantz says that he's not stepping down for political reasons. He says that, in fact, Netanyahu's been behaving in such a way that he looks like he's making decisions about the war based on his political future rather than on what's good for the country. And Gantz is therefore calling for early elections. He's calling for elections on the anniversary of the war around 12 months after it happened. So he wants that in the autumn. And then he said that he would like to build a national unity government from a broad selection of parties. But of course, unless that happens, this resignation will basically have been pointless, because it will just mean that Netanyahu carries on, conducts the war as he sees fit for the country. And as I said, it might in the end mean that he has to push further right. It might make a deal actually less likely, because if there was pressure to make a deal with Hamas, according to what Biden announced not that long ago, he has perhaps less of that pressure now from in the war cabinet. And that deal is controversial because while Biden announced it as being Israel's deal, it seems that what he announced was at least a repackaging of what Israel had proposed. Israel didn't quite recognize it in the way that Biden described it, because it seemed not to deal with the question of leaving Hamas in charge in the Gaza Strip, which is something that Netanyahu says he just won't consider. He said that Hamas must be removed as the governing power in that area.
Jonathan, great stuff. Thank you, sir. Really appreciate your time. That is Jonathan Sacerdoti, the journalist and broadcaster with us on the programme.